The UFC didn't choose the White House because it looked cool. They chose it because Dana White wants the UFC mentioned beside the NFL, the Olympics, and presidential history. That's the real reason Freedom 250 exists, not just as a fight card, as a statement. And honestly, it might be the smartest gamble the UFC has ever made. This matters because Freedom 250 isn't just another pay-per-view. It's the UFC testing whether mixed martial arts can become fully mainstream American culture. We're talking politics, celebrity influence, national branding, and global headlines all colliding in one event. Today, we're breaking down the real reason the White House became the location, what the UFC gains from it, who actually pushed for it behind the scenes, and why some fans think this could permanently change the sport forever. Because once the octagon lands on the White House lawn, there's no going backward. The first reason is simple: visibility. And Dana White has spent years trying to position the UFC as bigger than combat sports, bigger than boxing, bigger than niche fandom. He wants the UFC viewed as a core American institution. And putting a card at the White House instantly changes perception. Think about the optics. Fighters walking out with the White House behind them, national broadcasts, politicians cage side, military flyovers overhead. That's not just sports promotion. That's branding on a completely different level. And the UFC knows spectacle drives modern audiences. Look at UFC 229 in October 2018. Khabib versus McGregor wasn't just about rankings. It became a worldwide event because of the chaos, the personalities, and the cultural crossover. The pay-per-view reportedly sold 2.4 million buys. The UFC learned something massive that night. Attention matters more than tradition. And Freedom 250 is basically the next evolution of that idea. But here's where things get even more interesting. The White House wasn't just chosen for publicity. It was chosen because of relationships. Dana White has long-standing political connections dating back years. Most fans know he's appeared publicly with major political figures multiple times. Those relationships matter when you're trying to host a live combat sports event at one of the most secure properties on Earth. This wasn't some random venue booking request. There were reportedly massive discussions involving security coordination, broadcast logistics, federal approvals, and infrastructure concerns before the idea even became realistic. Think about what has to happen here. Outdoor lighting, fighter security, Secret Service coordination, crowd management, airspace restrictions. That's not a normal UFC operation anymore. That's essentially a national-level production, and the UFC wanted that exact feeling. Quick question, though. What other sports league could even attempt this? Because honestly, there aren't many. The second major reason is timing. The UFC understands attention cycles better than almost any sports company. They know controversy spreads. They know spectacle spreads even faster. And right now, sports organizations are competing for shrinking audience attention every single week. So how do you dominate headlines instantly? You create something nobody else can copy. That's exactly what Freedom 250 does. Look at the modern sports landscape. The NFL owns Sundays. The NBA dominates social clips. Soccer owns global reach. The UFC needed a cultural moment strong enough to punch through all of it. And a White House fight card guarantees mainstream coverage, even from people who hate the idea. That's important, because outrage still creates clicks. The UFC learned that years ago with Conor McGregor. Every controversial moment made him bigger. The bus incident before UFC 223 should have damaged his star power permanently. Instead, the event exploded in attention. The UFC doesn't fear controversy anymore. They monetize it. And Freedom 250 feels designed for non-stop debate. Another huge factor is international branding. This part gets overlooked constantly. The UFC already dominates in the United States, but internationally, they're still trying to become a truly unstoppable sports property. Events in Abu Dhabi helped massively. So did cards in Australia and England. But the White House creates something different. It creates symbolism. To global audiences, the White House represents American power, politics, and influence. Whether people love that or hate it doesn't even matter. The image itself carries weight. Now imagine championship fights happening there. That visual alone becomes historic. The UFC understands clips travel faster than explanations. One cinematic fighter walkout beside the White House could generate more social media traffic than 10 normal fight nights combined. And remember, the UFC's social strategy is elite already. Short clips, viral knockouts, embedded documentaries, press conference drama. They package moments better than almost anybody in sports. Freedom 250 gives them endless material, but there's also a personal layer here people ignore. Dana White has always wanted legitimacy. That sounds strange considering how huge the UFC already is, but think about the history. Back in the early 2000s, many politicians openly criticized mixed martial arts. The sport struggled with regulation. Some states wouldn't even sanction events. John McCain famously called it human cockfighting years ago. That label followed the UFC everywhere. Now fast forward. The sport is regulated worldwide. ESPN broadcasts events. Fighters become global celebrities. Billion-dollar media deals exist. And now the UFC is potentially hosting an event at the White House itself. That's a massive image reversal. For Dana White personally, Freedom 250 probably feels like proof the UFC finally won. And honestly, that might be the biggest reason this event exists. Because this card isn't really about one fight. It's about validation. But there's still a dangerous downside nobody can ignore. If the event goes badly, the backlash will be brutal. Bad fights? The internet clowns it instantly. Technical problems? Endless memes, political controversy, mainstream media backlash, security problems? Complete disaster territory. The stakes are unbelievably high because the platform is unbelievably big. A normal week UFC card disappears after a week. Freedom 250 won't. People will remember this forever one way or another. And that pressure affects everybody involved. Fighters, broadcasters, UFC executives, production crews, everyone. Even weather becomes a factor outdoors. One bad storm could throw the entire event into chaos. That's how risky this really is. But the UFC seems completely willing to accept that risk because they believe the reward is bigger. And honestly, they're probably right. Think about sports history. The biggest moments usually sound ridiculous at first. The fight of the century. Tyson fighting in Japan. McGregor boxing Floyd Mayweather. The Sphere event in Las Vegas. Massive risks create massive memories. Freedom 250 fits that exact pattern. And here's the payoff. The White House wasn't chosen because it was convenient. It wasn't chosen because it was traditional. It was chosen because Dana White wants the UFC permanently attached to American cultural history. This event is the UFC screaming that mixed martial arts isn't underground anymore. It's mainstream, it's political, it's entertainment, it's business, it's global spectacle. And whether fans love that evolution or hate it, Freedom 250 proves one thing clearly. The UFC doesn't think like a sports company anymore. It thinks like a media empire. So now I want your take. Is Freedom 250 a genius move for the future of mixed martial arts, or has the UFC finally crossed into pure spectacle territory?